Hi, I'm Vicky Blackwell. I'm a child and adolescent psychotherapist. I've decided to do a video on trauma. I feel it is a very well used word that perhaps isn't as understood outside of the psychotherapy world. So, what is trauma? Trauma is an overwhelming amount of fear. So much so, it can permanently affect the brain. So much fear that it changes the way our brain operates and functions. It alters the way that we see the world and the way that we see people, and it affects our responses to those situations and relationships. So, what causes trauma? Situations where we are overwhelmed by the amount that we need to think about and our feelings. Certainly, a good example of this would be COVID-19. Not only was there an overwhelming amount of fear from the virus itself and the impact of the virus would have on us if we caught it, whether we would be ill or whether we would actually die, massive amounts of fear, but also the emotional impact of lockdowns and loneliness and deprivation and isolation and the unknown, not knowing what the government was doing and the rules and the regulations and all of that stuff we had to process and understand. This would be an excellent example of trauma. Other highly emotional situations, such as grief and loss, are likely to cause trauma. Certainly situations that have happened very quickly, where we've not had time to process mentally what's happened and the impact's been very great on us. Having to live in an abusive situation for a long period of time, certainly in the hands of someone who is supposed to love us, whether that's a partner or a parent. Those people who are supposed to love us and care for us are the ones that are abusing us, is in a massively traumatizing situation and something very, very complex to process and understand. Big levels of rejection and shame and hurt at the same time. Massively traumatizing. Also, those people who have had to suffer injury or have illnesses where there's need for long-term treatment. Not only is there trauma on the body is fearful of being hurt again physically, but also the emotional impact in terms of how their lives change or how their lives are needed to adapt, and then the emotional impact of the loss of having the injury or the illness and what that impact is on their lives. So how do we feel when we're experiencing trauma? I think the lockdown example would be a good example of that. I think we all had that feeling of anxiety, but yet a little bit sloppy and depressed and not knowing what was going on and what was doing. Some people would have been able to adapt to that better, and some people really felt the impact of those feelings, but I'm sure that we all had a taste for what trauma was in those times. It's that feeling of being anxious yet not having the ability to take any action to help yourself or soothe the anxiety, fearful symptoms. You can feel foggy and spacey and a little bit paralyzed, shaky, heartbeat, breathlessness, and it can be a really unbearable sensation to live with, and feeling that no one can help you with it, almost like a chaos and a numbness at the same time. So in mind feeling chaos and body feeling numb, and just not being able to marry those two up together, just kind of blur. But yet also with this, we also feel a sense of disconnection. Our ability to communicate and seek help with others becomes much more difficult because we're not understanding what's going on. Along with that comes the feeling of shame. We're feeling different, we're feeling a bit alien, we're feeling a bit out of the world, a bit disconnected, and that instantly makes us feel not part of our social world, and that can be a highly shaming situation as well. Within relationships, we're not able to trust people. The shame of not being understood, we can lack confidence, making us not be able to move forward with things like expressing ourselves and job interviews and taking on, challenges in life. All of this mixed together with fear, it just feels so overwhelming. So what are the long-term effects of having trauma in your life and these feelings? People, particularly children who have suffered trauma in their childhood, Their brains have adapted so much so that they become more sensitive to daily stress after the traumatizing event. So a stressful situation, a small car accident, let's say a little bump, could be really traumatizing to somebody who's had trauma previous in their life. The event itself, the fear on the body, perhaps just from a little bump, but could I have got seriously hurt? All of the process of having to do the insurances, the shock of afterwards and all of that can actually be quite traumatizing to somebody who's been through a bigger car accident prior in their life. We often are triggered by situations that remind us. So if there was a conflict, argument within a relationship in our lives, and perhaps we're witnessing this and we've witnessed domestic violence in our early life, then we can feel those sensations of trauma and fear come about us when we're watching other conflicts, even if they're not actually as harmful as they seem or would have been in the past. Our body doesn't know any different. It will just be triggered by those events and react in the way that it reacted for the original trauma. So how do we heal trauma? How do we recover from trauma? As I say, it is something that can permanently affect the brain. However, when we learn to recognize those sensations that can feel really overbearing, and we realize that it's not actually the current situation that's causing those sensations, it's actually a trigger from our past, we then can respond to it differently. We can find ways to soothe ourselves. We can go, oh, there it is. There's that sensation. There's that sensation that I feel very, very anxious yet paralyzed. I don't know how to move forward with it. I know I'm feeling traumatized by this current situation. How can I soothe myself? How can I seek help? How can I be open and honest about how I'm feeling and find ways to meet my needs when I'm feeling like this? Actually, the more and more we practice that, the more and more we practice realizing the sensations and responding to the sensations, the more we learn to regulate the feeling, the more we learn to hone the feeling in as just a feeling and not something that's actually happening to us, which is really important. It takes practice, it takes time, but the first thing is to realize that that feeling, that sensation is just a feeling. And obviously there are times in our life where there are traumas and we will feel these sensations again. But the more and more we can soothe those sensations and work through them, the more we'll be able to start functioning at a higher level, let's say, when we're in those situations, rather than letting the trauma completely overwhelm us. So with the help from a psychotherapist or with help from friends and family, the more and more we talk about trauma and shame and the feeling of disconnection, the more and more we can help ourselves. And I hope that this video is an inspiration for those who perhaps do feel this, to talk more about those sensations and seek the help that's there